Oh, good morning, beautiful people. I'm Babz Rawls-Ivy. Welcome to the second hour of me talking to a guest this morning. I am unbelievably excited to be talking to Tanja Hester because she is the author of Wallet Activism, which, you know, I find this book to be so timely. My friends and I, we've been thinking about this kind of thing for a very long time. And we've decided to give gifts of experience rather than just arbitrary gifts, like run to the drugstore and give a damn gift because you're like, oh my God, I got to get a gift. No, we've been very thoughtful. So unmute yourself so we can talk. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you are powerful. Let me tell you, I am enjoying this book because what it says to me is people have more power in their wallets than they believe that they have. And particularly, you know, Tanja, Harry and I we've been talking lately with this whole supply chain shortage and how I feel like we're being manipulated to like go shop Christmas. Like they didn't say anything else. They just said, oh, if you want Christmas gifts, you better do it now. And I just found that message to be so manipulative. Am I wrong to think that, or am I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I just feel like that's okay. That's not what I want people to know.
I mean, I do think it's really important to train ourselves to remember that just about every message we hear anytime, certainly this year it's true, but any message is going to be motivated by someone trying to sell us something. You know, that's fundamentally at the root of basically everything. I do know that books in particular, which have a special place in my heart, are having some shortages. So I do encourage folks to get those early. But I went to the store last weekend just to get some marzipan because I'm of German descent and it's important that we have that on Christmas. I could not believe how busy the stores were. And I think everybody got that memo about do your Christmas shopping early or your holiday shopping early. And yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of consumerism this year. And I wish more folks would do what you're doing and switch to gifts of experience.
Yes. Oh, because I just feel like and a lot of things. I mean, you talk about a lot of things. You talk about you could use your money for good, but you have to be very thoughtful and deliberate about how you spend your money and where you spend your money. And that can be challenging for people, Tanja. Like that can be an inconvenience. Talk to me a little bit about that thinking about using our money in places and spaces for a greater good or for a higher purpose.
Yeah, you know, I think you can think of this so many different ways, and using your money for good is one way. Trying to avoid doing harm is another way. I think those are sort of two sides of the same coin, but it's sort of like anytime you learn a new skill, you do have to go through a little bit of a learning curve. You've got to learn to think a little bit differently, but then, you know, calling it an inconvenience, I think it's sort of a short-term inconvenience. You have to rethink some of the things you've been doing, but then after that, it just becomes second nature. The way that you do everything now is a set of decisions that you had to learn at some point. And so it's just sort of going through that process again, which I know as an adult might feel a little odd, but then you're there. And so I really encourage folks to come up with sort of 3 different categories, particularly when we're talking about buying stuff, which, as you know, isn't the whole piece of wallet activism. That's just a part of it. But to think about the things that you want to stop buying. And I bet we all have things that we could put in that category. But things that, you know, you learn, you know, that industry just supports bad practices that I don't want to be a part of funding. Or, wow, I didn't realize that doing this fed into fossil fuel development, for example. So I'm going to stop doing that. Then you've got the middle category of the things, like you said, where you have to be a bit more thoughtful, but you can still let yourself buy those things. And then you've got the category of things, and I think this is really important too, of things that you let yourself buy or engage with in some way without any guilt whatsoever. And so for me, it's buying books, it's buying tickets to cultural events, like I think
Yeah.
museums, ballet performances, concerts, all that stuff. I don't give it a second thought. And it sounds like for you and your friends, you've been doing more gifts of experience. That's wonderful. But I think that we all need those categories where it's like you don't have to be scrutinizing yourself in that way, because otherwise it's going to feel like a diet and that's not sustainable. So it's how do we fill those different categories in ways that feel right for you? And frankly, that's going to be different for all of us.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right, because I think so much of marketing is an emotional slap down. Particularly, I mean, you see it with the diet industry, you see it with clothes, you see it with all kinds of things to make people feel like if you don't have these things, you're less. And that's a hard emotional pull to break, particularly if your neighbors are doing it or have friends who are doing it, doing a thing. How do
Mm-hmm.
how do we how do we heal ourselves to those kinds of messages as wallet activists?
Yeah, some of this I think is wallet activism, and some is just pure good money management, which we all need as well. And I think it's important to remember that just because you might need to project a certain image for your job or for your place in the community, it probably doesn't mean that you need to maybe buy as much as you buy. And we forget that calibration piece. And so I am certainly not telling anyone, don't buy anything, never buy a new piece of clothing again or a new car. It's just let's all be a lot more thoughtful about it, because we're so pushed by marketing messages and consumerist messages. And sometimes within a community or a group of friends or a group of family, we can get sort of that keeping up with the Joneses idea. And
Hmm.
we're all egging each other on in a really unhelpful way. And sometimes taking a step back and saying, like, hey, do we all want to keep consuming like this? Can be a really powerful thing. And you might be able to bring everybody's level down a little bit so that you still got your place in the community, but without everyone having to consume all the time. So I think that's one thing. But also, just like, could you challenge yourself to say, whatever it is that you tend to buy a lot of, could I buy 25% less in 2022? So it's not about drastic cuts. It's about little bits of improvement over time. And then if that goes well and you go, you know what? Yeah, I bought a bit less this year and it was fine. Maybe you can cut it back a little bit more the following year so that you're just continuing to grow and improve. You're still doing the things you want to do, whether it's buying clothes, buying electronics, what have you. But you can trim that back so that you're doing less harm to the planet, less harm to the people involved in making this stuff for you. And that's all really good stuff. We should celebrate that.
So give me the definition of wallet activism.
Yeah. Taking a big step back. So, wallet activism is using your financial power in all its forms to push back against an unjust status quo. And so that really can be defined in so many different ways based on what you care most about. Whatever issues are closest to your heart, those are the things I recommend that you focus on. But we've talked a bit about shopping so far. Obviously, that's a big part of it, but that's only one part. It's also what you eat and how much you eat of different things. It's what you do for work. And if you don't have a choice about what you do for work, it's how you conduct yourself at work, which can be a form of wallet activism because work is very much a financial transaction. It's where you choose to live, where you keep your money, how you give your money away. It's really anytime money is involved in some way, you have power and you have an opportunity to push for change.
I like that. I like that very much. Do you think did you write this, Tanya, because you found that people felt like they didn't have power, or you were seeing people not having power with their money? Like what was the catalyst for this movement?
Yeah, I think that a lot of folks listening, I'm sure, can relate to this idea that we all want to know that our money is doing some good. And if you find out that, oh, hey, this thing I've been buying, it's funding this bad practice I don't like, you go, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be part of that. And there's a lot of data that backs this up. Consumers are willing to spend more money if they think a company is aligned to good social causes. We know that people will boycott things if they think that the companies are doing bad practices. So there's a lot of evidence out there. And I think just anecdotally, we've probably all had conversations like that with friends of, well, I'm not supporting this company for X or Y reason. And I felt a lot of that. And I wanted to know, okay, what are the right things to do? And I didn't feel like there was a book or any tool out there that actually gave me the full picture. There were some out there that said, okay, here are some things you can do, but they felt sort of overly simplistic or overly dumbed down in a way that I didn't think was really helpful. You know, for example, recycling. We've all been recycling for 30 years. We haven't saved the planet yet. Um, so this, oh, let's just recycle that, you know, that's good advice, but we need to do a lot more than that. And so I just didn't feel the resources out there. So, you know, I said, I've got time, I've got the skills to write this research wise. I'm going to take it on. And I hope I've delivered on that promise. You know, I've tried to make a really comprehensive book that lets you have a lot of latitude in what you do and reminds you that perfection is not the goal, but still gives you a lot of tools to make some changes that feel right to you.
Mm-hmm. And I saw the piece on personal value statement and how to do that. Walk us through that process. Like, should everyone have a personal value statement about their money or how they're going to use their money?
Yeah, I think if everyone had a value statement around money, it would be, you know, we'd live in a better world, both in terms of the choices we're making and in terms of people feeling more empowered to make good choices in the interest of their own finances, which is important too. Your financial well-being is an important piece of this. But the best example I can give is, or analogy rather, is to say if you're a vegetarian and someone offers you a hamburger, you don't have to waste any mental energy thinking about, do I want this burger? You just go, nope. You know, that decision is made. I can move on, say no, and then move on to the actual hard decisions in my day and use my willpower there. It's the same thing with a money value statement. If you've come through and you've said, here are the issues that I care most about, here are the values that are most important to me in the world that I want to support with my values or withdraw my support from, you then have automated a whole bunch of your choices. If you're faced with, do I want to buy this thing? You say, nope, I don't buy that thing anymore. I don't shop with this company, or I don't want to conduct myself at work this way. And then you've moved on. You've already made that decision one time. It's written there, and you can now spend your willpower and your mental energy on things that are important. And so that's really the value of doing it. It helps you make decisions in those tough moments, and it automates a lot of the decisions in a way that I think we all really need, because we're faced with just dozens and dozens of decisions every day. And if we treat wallet activism as something that's going to contribute to that decision fatigue, it won't stick. We want it to stick. So making it as automated as possible is really, you know, good for all of us. And I think that's true outside of wallet activism too, just for all financial things of, nope, I don't buy things in this category. That's not how I want to spend my money. I want to hold on to it and save it for other goals. That's a really important piece too.
Mm. You talk a lot about food and the importance of what you buy. Now, I know you no stranger to food deserts in particular neighborhoods and all
Mm-hmm.
across this country. That people, there are a lot of people who don't have access to fresh organic anything, let alone not organic things. And so, how do people sort of adopt being more thoughtful and mindful about how they shop for their food in communities, and how do they weigh those decisions, particularly if you have to just get food on the table?
Oh, yeah. You know, one of the things I say right at the outset of the book is that no one will be able to do everything I talk about in the book. Absolutely no one. Maybe Jeff Bezos or something, but not many more of us. So you've got to prioritize based on what's within your ability. And that might be based on financial resources. As you said, it might be because of the availability of different foods in your community. It might be because of a disability that limits you from being able to do certain things. You know, it really drives me up the wall to see people getting shamed for buying, for example, pre-cut fruit that's wrapped in plastic. Like, yes, that's a bummer. We'd rather not see plastic get used that way. But a lot of folks don't have the ability to use a knife and need their fruit pre-cut up. And we shouldn't be shaming people for that. And I think similarly, this is not to shame anybody who has limited food choices and can't make all the choices that we talk about. The main things in the food section that I think are the most important pieces are that organic is not actually a magic bullet. Organic doesn't solve all our problems. Oftentimes, with certain fruits and vegetables, if they're grown organically, it's actually more harmful to the farm workers. And if all of our food was grown organically, it would mean more cropland used for food. And with the case of animal products, it would mean that the animals actually have greater carbon emissions because, for example, with a cow, if it's grass-fed organically, it has to live a whole lot longer, more than 2-3 times as long as a cow that goes to a feedlot. And that means it's burping and farting and putting out all that CO2 and methane the whole time. And so we have to be real that if we care about the climate, just going to, sort of these, what I lovingly call the hippie forms of food growing, that's not necessarily the answer. In some cases, that actually does more harm. And so I want to rid people of that guilt. If you aren't able to eat all organic, that's okay. Non-organic actually has some upsides. And it's important that we talk about those things. But I think, if food is not an area that you have a lot of control over, that's okay. Focus on the other stuff where maybe you can just do what you can to get food on the table. And then in whatever free time you've got, maybe work with your community to try to figure out, okay, could we do some community supported agriculture? Urban farming is becoming much more popular. Yes. And that's something that absolutely everybody can support in some way. And so it's maybe day to day, just do what you can to survive, but then outside of that, working to change the system. And that's maybe real activism outside of wallet activism, but that's important too.
Talk to me about carbon footprint. Everybody's talking about, I have to reduce the carbon footprint. I'm gonna have less. I'm gonna do less. What is that?
I mean, the concept of thinking about your impact on the planet and the climate and other people, frankly, I wish that was part of the discussion more often. But that concept is a good one. We should all be paying attention to how our individual choices impact the world around us. But the concept of the climate, or the carbon footprint rather, was invented by British Petroleum, who you may know as one of the largest carbon emitters on the planet, and responsible for the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf, which was one of the largest oil spills in history. They spend millions and millions of dollars a year lobbying world governments to push back against regulating greenhouse gases and regulating the fossil fuel industry. But they did this brilliant piece of marketing of inventing the carbon footprint and getting us all to feel guilty for our individual impact when they're out here emitting more than almost anybody. So it's not a term that I like to use because it has such dark origins that are deeply manipulative and based on this lie that consumers can solve this all on our own. And instead, I like to talk about, kind of both pieces of it, of corporations are responsible for a huge chunk of emissions, but we also are their customers. We're the ones funding their work. And so if we weren't supporting them, they couldn't do what they do. So it's important to look at both sides of it.
Because I see a lot of people coming down hard on people with leaf blowers, right? Like this is like, I'm thinking, why are we mad at the leaf blowers, but we're not mad at the buildings that being built every single day all over the place that emit more than these little leaf blowers, right? So I was just concerned about that because everybody's like, oh, I hate the leaf blowers. I'm like, they're not the problem. I mean, there's a teeny bit of the overall problem.
And that's absolutely right. They're noisy, they're annoying. Get mad if someone's using one at 6 a.m. outside your window, but otherwise, let's focus on the big picture here.
I think they masquerade the carbon footprint for the part about, well, it's just noisy and I just can't stand it. Like that's really what they want to say. So talk to me about financial institutions and the use of them. I'm a credit union person, right? Because I just felt like early on, that would be a better deal for my money. At least I can have some say, or I think I have some say in how money is used when I put it in there. So talk a little bit about financial institutions and choices we have for using them.
Yeah, so most people have a bank as kind of your frontline financial institution. And some folks also might work with an investment institution, whether that's through a workplace retirement account that you're using that you don't have any choice over, or you actually choose to open an account on your own and invest in stocks or bonds, that kind of thing. Those are our main interactions with financial institutions. In the personal finance world, if you go to any personal finance website, you're likely to see something about responsible investing. That's been a popular buzzword for a lot of years now. And a lot of people care. They say, well, I don't want to support Exxon. And so I don't want to be invested in Exxon. How do I make sure that my retirement accounts or my IRA or my mutual funds don't contain Exxon stock? Just for example, there are any number of folks you could pick on for that. And so that's been a big piece. And that comes with its own challenges, because just like there's greenwashing in any marketing, there's also greenwashing in the investment industry. But it's been really interesting to me to learn, as I did the research for this book, that we're so focused on investing and what our money is funding there, that most of us haven't paid attention to responsible banking. And that's actually much more important. And so you going with a credit union, you don't have to worry about this. You're already doing this right. But a huge percent of us bank with the big banks, the Chase banks, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Citibank, folks sort of at that level, the multinational banks. And those banks are the biggest funders of new fossil fuel projects in the world. So you'd like to think that your money sitting in your savings account is going out and being used to help first-time home buyers in your community get into their first home, or to help business owners of color finance their new small business. Very little of that is in fact happening with money sitting in the savings accounts at the big banks. Instead, that money is getting lent out to fund big oil pipelines. It's getting lent out to fund mining projects for conflict minerals. It's getting lent out to do all the things that you probably don't like and don't want to be a part of funding. And if you can move your money instead to a credit union, a community bank, a Black-owned bank, there are a whole bunch of newer options that are banks with a social mission. There are unionized banks. You've got really a lot of choices. And it's sort of one of those things where it's painful one time, switching from a big bank to another. You have to switch all your deposits. You have to get the new app. You have to do all these things. But then it's done. Then it's done forever. And you'll know that you're not letting your money go to fund fossil fuels or other bad practices. And that's a really powerful thing. That's one of the single most powerful things you can do. And that's within the power of just about everybody. Almost everybody has a bank. So if you have a bank and you can switch, you are doing a powerful, powerful thing.
I like that. Talk to me about greenwash, woke wash.
Yeah, I don't know if woke washing is an official term. That's kind of what I call it.
I like it though. I like
it.
We
all, I think, saw probably a lot of that last year around the George Floyd protests, where all these companies put up the black squares on their social and made these big statements about, oh, we stand for racial justice and we this and that. And then you look and their board of directors is every bit as white as it always was, or that's really what woke washing is proclaiming to have this social message and social mission that you don't back up with your practices. And likewise, greenwashing is presenting a company or a product as much more environmentally friendly or sustainable than it actually is. And just as we were talking about earlier, it's sort of really a matter of training your brain to remember that just about everything you hear is motivated by someone trying to sell you something. And just as companies have known for years that if something seemed to be more eco-friendly, that people would be more excited to buy it, I think we're seeing that same thing now with social messaging, that if you can talk about racial justice, people will feel more affinity to your brand, more likelihood to buy your products. And that's something that we need to push back against and hold those companies accountable and say, okay, this is what you said after George Floyd was killed. What are you doing to back it up? How have you changed the ranks of your senior leadership? How have you worked to improve pay equity among your staff? How have you worked to create more equity for your lowest paid workers? And if companies aren't doing that, then that's just pure woke washing and isn't real, and we shouldn't reward them for it.
Wow. So this wallet activism is, I think, the sister to marching in the streets, right? Like this is, you get in the streets, yes, but then the other part of that is wallet activism. Know where your money is going and what's it doing. So how long did it take you to learn all of this stuff? Like, and what was it what was the thing that said, you know what, this doesn't sit well with me. I'm gonna dig into this.
Yeah. Oh gosh, so many of those things. I think the full process of writing the book was about 2 years, but I think a lot of the information that's in here had been collecting in my brain for much longer than that. Little things I had heard here and there, and things also I will say that felt counterproductive. Like if you've been plugged into environmental spaces, that there's been this fight for years over, is almond milk really okay to have because almonds take all this water to grow. And I thought, one, this just feels like a weird distraction. I almost wondered if the dairy industry was behind that fight, was like feeding into it, because the point is that any non-dairy milk is still inherently environmentally better than dairy milk. And that's not to say you can't have your dairy, but maybe you reduce it. Like we eat ice cream in my house, we eat regular cheese, but we have almond milk and we put that on our cereal. And so you can scale some things up or down, and make little changes rather than total ones. But almonds are actually a net positive in a way because most of them are grown in the southern Central Valley in California. And that's an area that has historically grown cotton, which is much more water intensive than almonds. And so when the almond orchards go in, they're replacing cotton. So you actually have less water being used there. And it's also reforestation because you're putting in trees in an area that was bare. And we've left that out of the conversation. And so it was things like that that sort of made me say, I feel like we're focusing on the wrong things here. We're focusing on these little nitpicky decisions instead of looking at the big picture. We're often looking at the environment to the exclusion of people. And we're not looking at the treatment of farm workers, for example, if we're talking about food, or we're not looking enough at the treatment of factory workers or even forced laborers in many cases. And we're just looking at, does the company have a woman CEO? Like, okay, well, yeah, that's important. We need more women CEOs, more CEOs of color. But those are already some of the most privileged people in society. Let's look instead at the frontline workers and really focus on that. So it was all those pieces kind of floating around in my brain that I said, I want to try to find a way to bring them all together. And so I guess that sort of is my answer to your question. I mean, this was a many-year process, definitely a labor of love of trying to figure this out for myself as much as for anyone else, but figuring I know a lot of people want this information like I do. And so let's find a way to pull it together.
I like it. I really think this ought to be required reading in high schools, right?
Oh, thank you.
No, seriously, because I think if we can arm people young enough with this information, then that's how the world will get better and change. Like we could make better decisions about how we build buildings and how we make communities and what we sell in grocery stores and how we get food to grocery stores. Like I just feel like that just makes sense to me. So um um uh tell me how hopeful you are about the world and our place in it and how we are are you seeing the growth of wallet activism? Are you seeing that people are really starting to pay attention to what they do with their money?
Yeah, I see a lot of good intentions right now. And I worked for many years before writing this as a political consultant and a consultant to social change campaigns. And I worked on a whole lot of different progressive issues. And by far, always the hardest thing in any social change campaign is getting people to care. For example, we did a campaign to get people to pay attention to the genocide in Darfur in Sudan. And just getting people to care about folks in Africa was like a really, really hard thing. And it took years just to get it to that level of, hey, do you know this genocide is happening and you should care about it? And then once they cared, it was actually fairly easy to move forward and start thinking about, okay, how do we stop funding this, for example? And that was in its own way a wallet activism campaign. But the good news right now with this is people care. We already have people engaged. We have people angry. If you look at what's happening in Glasgow right now at COP26, I mean, the streets are filled with people who are
Yes.
furious that more action isn't happening. And that's much more than we've seen at past climate conferences that many countries have participated in. So I think we are just full of people who care about the environmental issues, people who care about the social issues. I would love if people would care about all of it together. And I think that especially for younger people, that's true. That's really much more how they're thinking rather than us older folks, which is a positive change. And so we're already over that hurdle of getting people to care. So now it's okay, well, now how do we break through the marketing and get people to actually take steps that are meaningful and impactful instead of doing the things that the marketers want you to do? We talked earlier about recycling. I mean, once people are more aware that recycling has been promoted largely by the plastics industry because they found that if they told you your stuff was being recycled, that you would feel good about buying more plastic. Well, guess what? Glass and metal, those things get recycled at pretty high rates, paper decently well, but plastic, almost none of it actually gets recycled that you put in the bin. And if you know that, you're then going to be a little angry. You're going to say, well, I'm not going to buy as much plastic. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So we need to get info like that out there so that people who already have this passion and this fire can just channel that into better choices.
Mm-hmm. Talk to me about the philanthropic community. I know that's.
Woo.
I mean, we got a few more minutes, but there's so many things I wanted to talk to you about, so I have to have you come back because I just find all this so fascinating. But no one ever puts the spotlight on a philanthropic community.
Yeah, I think it's been shined a little bit on some of the foundations during the pandemic because Bill Gates, for example, the Gates Foundation were so instrumental in the vaccine process and in some ways made it worse. But basically, we have a system in the US in particular, but true in some other countries as well, where we allow very rich people to put aside a chunk of money, take a big tax write off on that money, and then continue controlling that money through a philanthropic foundation where they donate some portion of it every year, but they get to keep controlling it. They get to hire as many staff as they want, and they get to focus on whatever issues they think are most important. And what that means is that we have a lot of our social priorities being set by these huge foundations that are, think of the names you hear at the end of NPR programs, that's who we're talking about, that level of big foundation. And they get to spend billions of dollars a year all over the world, and they have no accountability to voters. They have, in many cases, hurt whole fields of activists and on the ground organizers by funding something and then saying, you know what, we're not interested in this anymore. And then pulling out all the funding. And now all these people are out of a job. And we just have a deeply broken system. My argument would be we should just tax those folks properly so that that money can instead be held in a way where the public has a vote on what happens with it, and we can set our priorities as a country or as states. But we don't do that. And so what we need to do as individuals is donate more and donate more regularly so that it's predictable for organizations. Because right now, if you're a nonprofit and you're getting foundation dollars, basically that foundation is God to you. They say jump, you say how high. And you let them set priorities for you, where if they have more individual giving in a more predictable way, because in fact, individual giving does exceed foundation giving. It's just that people don't give every month or every year like clockwork, where those organizations can count on it. And if we donate more regularly, then those organizations can set their own priorities and can say, here, we know what the needs are. If we're focused on hunger, we're focused on education, they can focus on the right things instead of doing just what the big foundations want them to do. And so, in a perfect world, we'd toss that whole foundation system. We don't live in that world, unfortunately. So we as consumers have to kind of fill in the gap and try to do better to offset some of that. But yeah, it's not a great system.
All right. So Tanja, tell me, what are you most hopeful about?
Yeah, I think the fact that people care so much means that we are going to see real progress. I know that right now we'd love to see nations committing to more concrete goals on climate. We'd love to see more rapid change, but change feels very slow until all of a sudden it isn't. And the most recent example we can all think of is same-sex marriage, where public support for that was not particularly high. And then all of a sudden the Supreme Court made a decision, legalize same-sex marriage everywhere, and then very quickly public support shifted in favor. And it was decades and decades of activists working behind the scenes to create change on that. And it felt like nothing was happening. And then all of a sudden it completely flipped. And I think that we can expect things to happen like that in social issues and on environmental issues here, because we are really at a critical mass of public support and public demand for change. And so I'm hopeful that we're going to see some big changes, but I do think it also means we have to keep pushing and hold government and hold corporations accountable so that those changes stick and they aren't just temporary. But I think the fact that people care is huge, because that's not something that's always true. And I think we're in a special time where stuff feels dark in many ways and feels hopeless. But I just want to remind folks that no, the fact that so many people care, that means something, and that's going to swing the scales, I think, sooner than we think.
Mm. Oh my gosh, Tanja, Hester, this was a wonderful conversation. I've enjoyed this so much. And Harry, put up your site, Our Next Life, Building Financial Power, and all your stuff is up there. Because you have a podcast too, so people can listen in, and people can check you out and read the book. And I would dare say this probably needs to be a workbook too. Like there should be a sister workbook to it.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Maybe that's the follow-up. We've got that little workbook section in values, but I've seen some folks who've had early copies of it who've marked it up and highlighted stuff. And it just really warms my heart. I think it's that kind of a book.
I'm one of these people. This might be on somebody's Christmas. This might be on my Christmas list for folks this year. Like I'm gonna be like Oprah. Okay, I'm gonna give you a book. I give books anyway. I love giving people books, but I think this is a thought-provoking, life-changing sort of book. And I think people will get some good value in it. Thank you for your time, Tanya. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you come back.
Thank you so much. I'll come back anytime, but appreciate you having me.
I appreciate you. So, and thank you to your team. They were so wonderful to coordinate with. So I appreciate them greatly.
I'll let them know. Thanks.
All right. Take good care. Thank you.
You too. Thanks. Have a good one.
All right. All right, friends who know me and I love, this might be in your stocking for Christmas. So wallet activism, I have it. Tanya. All right, Harry. We're going to pull out today. Thank you. Tomorrow, I'm talking to Nick, Maria about the Jazz Underground. So that's going to be a good conversation because they've been doing a lot of cool stuff, and they're out here in these playing jazz, and I'm loving it. So that was a good conversation, Harry. I hope Paul Bass was listening around some of these issues. So I'm on my way out. Thank you. This is Babz Rawls-Ivy from New Haven, Connecticut, and you're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM, streaming live at newhavenindependent.org.